I am the Ascended Master Saint Germain. It is my privilege and my choice to be the primary Ascended Master working with us for these next 2,000 years. My beloved, in my ongoing unfoldment of the vision I hold for the Golden Age and how the Golden Age can be brought about, I wish to bring to your attention a topic that is of quite large importance. Now, one of the primary shifts in consciousness that happened in most democratic nations when they became democracies was that people in general started having more faith in their governments. They started having the sense that their governments were not out to dominate them, to abuse them, to enslave them, to take advantage of them. And they started having a sense that they were living in a more benevolent time, a more benevolent society, where there was not the obvious abuse and enslavement that they had known in the past. This, of course, is a positive and necessary development. There is, however, a downside of everything when it comes to the human consciousness, the consciousness of duality, and its uncanny ability to take everything into an unbalanced state. So what has happened in many, especially of the older democracies, is that there has developed this consciousness that has become very powerful and often takes over the minds of those people who are part of the democratic government, whether they are among the elected representatives, the bureaucracy, the media, the educational system, whatever. And this consciousness is that these people who are the leaders of democratic societies, they basically believe that what they are doing now is good enough, that they are fulfilling their responsibility towards the people by ensuring a somewhat peaceful and stable society and a stable economy and so forth and so on. So the perception is that as long as a democratic society is functioning reasonably well according to the standard, then the leaders are fulfilling their obligation and their responsibility towards the people. Now, what is the standard you are using to judge whether a democracy is functioning well? Well, it is often that you look at other democracies, you look at the history of democracy, and of course you look at societies that do not have a democratic form of government and that may not have the same freedoms that you supposedly have in a democratic society. And based on this comparison, then people say, well, our democracy is doing quite well, isn't it? And the other people say, yes, we are doing quite well compared to how it was before we had democracy and compared to this other nation. And so you build this sense that what you have done is good enough. But what I would like to point out to you is that when I look at the state of democratic nations, I see very clearly that there is not a single democratic government that is anywhere near to fulfilling its responsibility towards its people. Why is this so, my beloved? It is because it is the responsibility of a government to protect the people. Well, we should say this is one of the responsibilities, but it certainly is a primary responsibility. So you think that if you have some kind of army, if there isn't war and the threat of war, if you have a police force, if you have various services in terms of health and so on, if you have an educational system, this is good enough. But is that truly protecting the people? Well, it is, but is it sufficient protection? Because we need to step up here and recognize that there has always been two kinds of evil on earth. One is the obvious one that everyone sees and sees as evil. But the other is a hidden one that most people do not see. And so we have the more obvious forms of evil, and most democratic nations think they are protecting their people against those, and many of them are to a large degree. But how many democratic nations have honestly and openly acknowledged the hidden forces of evil and have acknowledged that they are not protecting their people against them? Because how can you protect your people against something that you don't even know exists, and you don't understand the nature of it, and therefore, what chance do you have? How could you protect your people against cholera before you knew that there is a bacteria that creates this disease? And so, I am not at this point envisioning that most people in the democratic world are ready to step up and consciously acknowledge the teaching that we have on fallen beings and dark forces, because naturally the gap between the understanding that people have been given, even from either from materialism or Christianity, is very large. But there are universal aspects of our teachings that certainly can be grasped. And if you look at democracy, you see that a very important idea behind democracy is that all people have certain rights. And you have a right to happiness, life, liberty. But what has not so far been defined in any democratic constitution, but which needs to be defined, is that all human beings have the right to live in freedom from exploitation. You will see that democratic nations have to some degree freed their people from the more obvious forms of exploitation. You do not have a dictatorial leader who have a right to kill anyone he wants. There is a rule of law, there's a certain protection against the abuse of power. There is a certain protection against being exploited by other people for various purposes. But these are not the only forms of exploitation. They are only the forms that have been recognized by society or by people at large. And it is necessary for the golden age to be manifest that there is a rising awareness that there are many more subtle forms of exploitation that are being imposed upon the people. And so, I will therefore attempt to express this without referring to fallen beings and dark forces, but simply referring to what most people in democratic nations can lock into, namely that there has throughout history been various power elite groups who have attempted to exploit the people. And it is not so difficult for a critical mass of people to step up and realize that just because you enact a democratic form of government, this does not mean that you automatically get a society that is free from all power elites. This is not difficult to grasp for many, many people who have already started grasping this. What we need to envision, what we need to make calls for, is that they will be raised to a higher vision of this than what they get through the conspiracy theories and various websites that are always trying to be sensationalist and that are often portraying this in such a way that people don't think they can do anything about these hidden elites that are seeking to manipulate and take over society. The reality of the matter is, of course, that people can indeed do something about any power elite group, but they can do it in only one way, through awareness. The people cannot free themselves from any power elite until they become aware that the power elite exists, that it has certain intentions, that it has certain methods, and that it has used certain ideas to hide from the people and hide its intentions and methods from the people. And so, naturally, you have seen in history how people in various nations have become aware of a certain power elite, and they have done what has happened so many times, used violence to defeat the power elite. This, of course, will in no way bring the Golden Age. Violence and force cannot bring Saint Germain's Golden Age into manifestation, for it is a Golden Age based on an entirely higher vision. So we need to step up and recognize that the key to overcoming the power elite, the key to freeing yourself and the people from exploitation by a power elite, is to raise awareness. Why is this so? Why is it not enough to just know that a power elite is there so you can put them all under the guillotine? Well, it is because if you put one power elite under the guillotine, my beloved, another power elite will immediately start forming. Was that not the lesson you can learn from the French Revolution? Was it not the lesson you can learn from many other situations in history? So what will it take for the people to be free from the power elite? It is that you recognize the influence of consciousness. The power elite can never suppress the people only through violence and force. There must be some mental idea, as Mother Mary explained, that is fooling the people into thinking that they cannot do without the elite, or into simply not seeing what the elite is doing. And so there is always a limited awareness in the people that creates the opening for the power elite to step in and exploit the people. And so therefore, raising awareness is the key, but the awareness needs to be raised beyond simply knowing about the power elite. My beloved, this is also the main reason why most conspiracy theories have no constructive role whatsoever, because they attempt to raise people's awareness that there is this or that secret conspiracy, but they never raise the awareness further, even if it's true what they are saying, which it often is not, but they never raise the awareness to the point where the people start seeing what is the element of their own consciousness that allows the formation and existence of that elite. And so, this is the vision I am asking you to hold, and of course make the calls that we can enter a spiral where more and more people become willing to reach for this increased awareness. And my beloved, in strictly universal terms, many people can understand that as a free person, you need to be free of exploitation. As a citizen in a democratic nation, you have a right to be free of the exploitation of the power elite or any other group of people that are taking advantage of you. So it isn't so big of a leap to have these people see that it is actually the responsibility of a democratic government to look at their society and look at whether there is a hidden power elite and what is the agenda and the methods of that power elite. Until as a government or a governmental apparatus has done this, it has not fulfilled its obligation. And this is universally acceptable for a lot of people. It is also universally acceptable that you need to look at various aspects of society to see how, even in democratic nations, a power elite can form. And in some cases, as I have said before, they are not necessarily evil people. They don't necessarily have a malevolent intention, but they have a limited vision. It is a self-centered vision where they tend to see the universe through their personal filter. And they are thinking that there is some aspect of the universe that justifies their existence, their superiority, their control, and their power. Many of these power elites in democratic nations still believe that somehow, whether it is by nature or by the hand of God, they are better equipped to rule. They simply are more intelligent and they know better, they have greater power, they know far better than the people how the country should be run. Now, as was said in this invocation you gave, and as in the beautiful dictation by Master Moore last year, the foundational principle of democracy is that nobody knows better than the people how the country should be run. Now, this is a surprising statement to many, because they will point to examples from history where the people would have voted for something that later turned out to would have been disastrous, or where they did vote for something that turned out to be disastrous. Some will point to the election in the United States as an example of this. But I will let that one pass to another time, because I want to show you something very, very simple. What is the purpose of democracy? Well, this is a question that very few people have asked, and certainly no democratic government has asked this question. What is the purpose of democracy? And this you cannot understand without looking at consciousness. But again, in strictly universal terms, it is not so difficult to look at history, especially over the past couple of thousand years, and look at the fact that there has been incredible progress in society, especially in terms of technology. Incredible progress compared to the time of Jesus. You know very well that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, but you know also today he would have had a choice of many more sophisticated means of transportation. I am not here going to talk about which one he would have chosen. I will leave that to him. But nevertheless, there has been tremendous progress, and it is undeniable. How has this progress come about? A simple question with a simple answer. Raising of awareness. It is not just a matter of knowledge, my beloved. It is a matter of the raising of the awareness. And if you would care to look at what the average person knew, thought, understood about life 2,000 years ago, and compared to the average person today in a democratic nation, you would see that there has been a tremendous raising of the awareness of the people. Tremendous. You can barely imagine today how limited people's consciousness was 2,000 years ago, how limited was their worldview, their view on themselves, their ability to even ask questions about what kind of beings they are. And there has been a tremendous raising of awareness. Why has democracy come about? For thousands of years, the dominant form of government has been a dictatorship. Why did democracy suddenly emerge? Well, it can only be because there was a raising of the awareness of the people. It is not so difficult to look at certain discoveries of science and recognize that there must be a collective consciousness. You have many examples of this, even acknowledged and supported by scientific instruments, evidence, and experiments. And so, it is not impossible or difficult for people to step up and realize that there has been a raising of the collective consciousness, the collective awareness, and then it is not so difficult to realize that the continuation of progress depends on the continuation of the raising of the collective awareness. How else will progress continue when it has so far been driven by this raising of awareness, unless we also continue to raise people's awareness? And then it is not so difficult to look at history and see that in the past there have been various power elites who have been very aggressive in limiting what the people knew, but also limiting the people's awareness. You have seen in recent history how the communist nations were very strict in censoring what kind of information people were allowed to have, because the leaders realized that the only way that they could prevent a revolt was that the people in communist nations in the Soviet Union did not know how much better life was in the West. If people had known this, they would have rebelled against their station, but they thought they could not have anything better. You know even today that the Chinese government is censoring the internet and what people in China can access on the internet. You know, of course, the Korean government, the North Korean government, is strictly censoring what the people are allowed to know about the outside world. You can go back and see how for over 1,000 years, the Catholic Church was censoring what people were allowed to know, what books they were allowed to read. And you can quickly step up and realize that the primary weapon of the power elite, of a power elite, has always been to attempt to restrict the awareness of the people. And so, you can then take the next step and say, that if a democratic government is supposed to guarantee the freedom of its citizens, then this can be achieved in only one way, namely by making sure that there is not a power elite that is hidden from the people, that is restricting what the people know, whether it be about the power elite or about other topics. And therefore, it is one of the primary responsibilities of a democratic government to make sure that the people have access to free and complete information about how society works. As a democratic citizen, you have a right to be informed, because if you are not informed, how can you make free choices? It cannot be done. And so, how far can you then take this? Once you recognize that it is the responsibility of a democratic government to look at society, to look if there's a hidden power elite that the people do not know about, then to expose that power elite, and to also look if there is some kind of mechanism in society that is restricting the knowledge and the awareness of the people. once you recognize that this is a responsibility, you can begin to make demands about what a government should actually do, what the press should do, what the educational institutions should do. And my beloved, this is when you can then begin to open up for a consideration of how have people on earth been exploited throughout history by disinformation. Not only a lack of information, but direct disinformation. Wrongful, intentionally and maliciously wrongful information. And then, again, in strictly universal terms, you can begin to consider what areas of society are influenced by various forms of disinformation. And so, as just one example of how this can be done, you have in most Western democracies a situation where this country was, for many, many centuries, dominated by the Catholic Church first, and some countries then by the Protestant churches for the last 500 years. And so, is it unreasonable to consider what kind of disinformation was put upon the church through Catholic and Protestant Christianity? Then, of course, you can see that many Western nations have for the last 200 or 300 years been dominated by materialistic science, by a materialistic view of life. And again, you can ask the question, and this is a fairly universal, obvious question, what kind of disinformation has been put upon the people through materialism? Was there a power elite that took advantage of the Christian religion to program the people and limit the people with disinformation? Well, it doesn't take a very close look at history to see that of course there was. From the very beginning, there was a power elite around the Emperor Constantine who wanted to use Christianity to control his people. And this continued until the Catholic Church started losing influence over society. It does not take a genius to see this. It just takes a willingness to ask the right questions and look for the obvious answers. The answers that, as in so many cases, become obvious once you ask the right question. And so, is it then such a big leap to ask if there is one or several power elite groups who have also taken advantage, not just of science, but actually of scientific materialism, to again put disinformation on the people? And of course, you can then expand this and look at the economy. Is there a power elite that does not want the people to understand how the money system works? Well, how many people in democratic nations understand how the money system works? Very few. Could this possibly be engineered by a power elite that does not want people to understand how the money system works? If so, why wouldn't a power elite want the people to understand how the money system works? Perhaps it is because there is a power elite that is exploiting the people through the money system. And they know that if the people really understood how the money system works, they would not go along with this. Well, is it that not the responsibility of a democratic government to take a look at how the economy actually works and tell the people how it works, and then let the people decide whether they want to continue the current economy or whether they want to look for a better system? Would it really be beyond the responsibility of a democratic government to do this? I think not. And so you see, I know that there are many, many people in embodiment right now who are coming into that awareness where they also realize that there is a need to take a critical look at society. And what I am asking you to do is make the calls and also look yourselves so that you can be the forerunners for directing the attention of these people into focusing on the need to be free from exploitation by an elite. If this could be achieved, and it is a realistic goal, it could have a tremendous impact on the public debate in democratic nations. I am not necessarily looking here at any violent uprisings against the power elite, for this is not necessary and it is not my vision. But you understand that at the moment a critical mass of people shift their consciousness, then a democratic nation will shift and changes will have to be made. Why do you think, my beloved, if you look at my efforts to give freedom to humankind, why do you think that I wanted to create a period where most people live in democratic nations? It is because a democratic nation is far more